My name is Nikhil Shampur. I'm one of the development leads on the ArcGIS product team. I also go by Nick. So the agenda for today, I'm going to do an overview of ArcGIS Enterprise on Azure, talk about different deployment options that you have. We're going to touch upon what was new or released since the last time we met at Developer Summit with the releases for 10.6.1 and 10.7. Then I'd like to dive into some demos showing some of the new stuff that we've released, talk about different automation, and hopefully show you some code. After all, this is the Developer Summit. Give you some tips and tricks to leave with here, and then wet your whistle with some planned work that we're targeting for 10.7.1. Quick housekeeping, since this sort of helps guide me in terms of how much context and background I need to provide during the initial slides. Quick show of hands. Obviously, this is a developer summit, but how many of you would consider yourself non-developers or just IT administrators? Okay, fair bit. Just GIS administrators who have to sort of don both hats. Okay. Cool. How many of you are directly responsible for the management and installation upgrades of ArcGIS Enterprise? All right, almost the whole room, which makes sense, which is why you're here. How many of you are already using the cloud or planning, already using it? Oh, cool. That's almost the whole room. Anybody planning to in the next 6 months? All right, a few hands. Great. How many of you are aware of Cloud Builder and have used it previously? Oh, wow. Okay. So I guess this is a new audience, so that does help. Thank you for that. With that, I'd like to get started. With a quick overview, I'll try and give as much background so folks who are new to the technology are up to speed as well. This is really our guiding principle for the enterprise team and really what our mission statement, which is to make deploying ArcGIS Enterprise on Azure as seamless as possible. And we strive to do this at every release. And how do we achieve that? It's sort of a twofold strategy. One is we provide the software ready to go as virtual machine images in all of Azure public regions, all 54 of them, and also in the US GovCloud, codename Fairfax. And then to complement that, we provide deployment tools. And these deployment tools come in the form of Cloud Builder and automation. Now, why is that such a big deal, right? It is so that you can actually focus on your job, which is developing apps or using the product, as opposed to worrying about all of these things that come with the territory of Azure. Things like networking concepts of load balancers and virtual networks. So we want to really sort of make it easy for people to get started and not have to worry about these things. Right? So that's really why we're trying to simplify it for you. So we talked about Cloud Builder briefly. So what is it? In a nutshell, it's a desktop application for Windows. It installs really easily and quickly. It provides a wizard-driven experience for you to deploy ArcGIS Enterprise on Azure. It also provides some post-deployment operations that are common. It also integrates nicely with some Azure native features. Examples of those would be like Azure Managed Databases, things like Azure SQL Database, formerly known as SQL Azure, or Azure Database for Postgres, or the newly released Azure SQL Managed Instance. So it'll actually help you configure your deployments with some of these Azure native features. As ArcGIS Enterprise evolves and becomes more cloud native and learns to use some of these cloud native services, Cloud Builder will actually help you set those things up. Things like working with Azure Key Vault or blob storage, or working with Azure Active Directory. So that's really what Cloud Builder is for. At the last Developer Summit last year, the big announcement was the support for automation. This was released at the 10.6 version of Cloud Builder and ArcGIS Enterprise. With that, Cloud Builder takes on a new role itself. One way to look at it is, it's now this wizard-driven deployment experience in addition to being a designer for generating automation artifacts. So you'd use Cloud Builder, it would walk you through all these steps, and you would decide your desired site topology, the size of your machines, all the configuration, and then you can choose to save those out as automation artifacts. And when you choose to do that, what it actually generates is these artifacts. It generates an Azure Resource Manager template. It saves out the template parameters that you provided in the Cloud Builder experience. And all of the automation artifacts and the user-provided artifacts are also sort of packaged in this. You can target these deployment artifacts for a Visual Studio deployment project. So Visual Studio has an experience where you can actually deploy Azure resources within that experience. Or you can target command lines through PowerShell or cross-platform CLI. So when would you choose one versus the other? And really, the decision would be based on the spectrum of power versus simplicity. Cloud Builder, obviously wizard-driven. It's great if you're looking for the easiest way to get started. Cloud Builder would be your way. But if you're looking to customize or extend the deployment, that's when you'd look at automation artifacts and one of these three options that I mentioned: Visual Studio or PowerShell or Bash. What are some typical customizations that we see customers doing? Here are some examples. Cloud Builder, just given the nature of limited real estate on the UI, we try and limit the number of options that users can provide. One example is you get more fine-grained control over the exact name of resources, like things like load balancers or network interfaces or disks. Cloud Builder has some default names, but if you did want to change them, extensibility is provided through these automation artifacts. Another common scenario is if your virtual network or your network in Azure is segregated into different subnets, you can do that through automation, because Cloud Builder only allows you to pick a single subnet for your entire set of machines. Cloud Builder also doesn't do network security groups. So if you did want to do that as part of your deployment, you can do that through automation. You'll see in the 10.7 release, we have integrated Cloud Builder with some of the Azure monitoring services. But if you did want to do that, take it to the next level and configure things like alerts, you can do that through automation as well. And then there's advanced scenarios like configuring VM backups or scheduled maintenance. All of these things are not things that are in Cloud Builder today, but you can use our deployment artifacts and sort of add those on there. Quick caveat. Once you start extending these deployment artifacts and you make edits outside of Cloud Builder, it's kind of assumed that you know what you're doing and sort of the training wheels are off. At that point, you are sort of considered to be knowledgeable enough in Azure and its terminology to be able to actually operate outside of Cloud Builder. What is that? So another advantage of automation is it actually lets you integrate with all of these infrastructure or configuration management systems which deal with infrastructure as code and automated deploys. CI/CDs is big in the industry these days. With automation, you can actually integrate with any of these systems, be it Chef or Ansible or Vagrant or Travis CI. It's really these options. Another experience that you can sort of integrate with is right within the Azure Cloud Shell itself. And I'll do a demo showing how this works in a little bit, but you'll get the idea of the power of automation. Before I dive into a quick Cloud Builder demo, I just want to sort of go over some concepts, because these are some terms that I'll be using in future slides to sort of describe what Cloud Builder can do. So the pattern of WebGIS is fairly familiar to everybody, to most people in the audience at least. As you know, ArcGIS Enterprise has many moving parts. There's the portal for ArcGIS, there's the servers and data stores. You're now familiar with the concept of a base deployment, and then these additional role-based servers that you deploy, which can work with different kinds of data stores or databases. So these are depicted in this diagram for sort of clarity, if you will. Each one of these is basically an ArcGIS Enterprise site, and that's the smallest unit of deployment within Cloud Builder. In terms of deployment, so Cloud Builder is flexible. It allows you to deploy either a single machine deployment, or you could choose to deploy multiple machines as well. I just went through some of the different components that comprise ArcGIS Enterprise, like the portal component, the hosting server, the reverse proxy, or the ArcGIS data store. You can choose to put all of those in a single machine or a single tier, or you can sort of split those up into different tiers as well. And for each tier, you can have one or two or many machines depending on your needs. In terms of storage, it can work with basically a file system-based storage like a virtual machine, or you have the option of putting some artifacts in Azure blobs and tables, or Azure files as well. So those are three options we provide. So this is kind of a useful tip for folks who want to know how Cloud Builder works under the hood. So I think this will be valuable for the audience. So Cloud Builder really has two responsibilities. The first one is provisioning infrastructure resources, right? And what does this mean? This is basically all of the virtual machines, the disks, the load balancers, and it uses Azure Resource Manager APIs to do that. Once your infrastructure is up, the next thing it does is actually it triggers an in-VM configuration of all the ArcGIS components. And the way it does that, it uses our PowerShell DSC automation, and it uses the Azure DSC extension to trigger that. So just walking through those steps. The first step is it'll provision these Azure infrastructure resources. As I mentioned, things like virtual machines, their network interfaces, disks, availability sets, load balancers, virtual networks, etc. Right? So all of these get provisioned. The second is it'll actually stage these deployment artifacts. If you remember earlier I mentioned what these deployment artifacts are. They're the user provider artifacts like your license files, the certificates to use on your web servers, and then the actual automation code. Right? Once it does that, it basically triggers the deployment using an Azure Resource Manager template. Right? So it just invokes essentially this command under the hood. The command line equivalent is what I'm depicting here, but it basically deploys that into a resource group and provides a parameter file. And once the deployment is triggered in ARM, it tracks progress, and you see that through Cloud Builder when it finishes. So how would one get started with ArcGIS Enterprise on Azure? It basically involves three basic steps. The first one is you get an Azure subscription, obviously. The second one is you still acquire your licenses through the My Esri site at accounts.esri.com. And then the third is you'd get Cloud Builder. So Cloud Builder is a free tool that's available for download from our documentation, from the My Esri site, essentially. So those are the easiest ways to get started. Before I dive into a demo, I just want to highlight some of the new features that are made available at the last two releases of ArcGIS Enterprise. So at 10.6.1, we added support for upgrades. So basically one-click upgrades, if you will, where right within Cloud Builder, you can choose to upgrade your entire site and all its deployments from a prior version to the latest version. And this includes not just your base deployment, and federated servers, but even standalone GIS servers as well. So you can upgrade them right through an experience within Cloud Builder. At 10.6.1, we integrated with Azure Database for PostgreSQL. So if you have a preference for that flavor of databases to use in Azure, you can use Cloud Builder to set up your deployment that way. And then third, we added documentation on how you'd set up enterprise logins using Azure Active Directory with Portal for ArcGIS. Now switching gears to 10.7.1. This was a big release. There was a bunch of new features that were added. The first one is something that if you work in the Microsoft space, you'll realize it's really a big thing. And this is support for Azure SQL Managed Instance. And I'll go into a little more detail about what that is in coming slides. And then second, the hardest thing at 10.7.1, and all the talk is about ArcGIS notebooks and the notebook server. So you can use Cloud Builder to deploy the notebook server on Azure as well. The third feature that we added was an often requested feature from our user base, which is a cost estimator right within Cloud Builder. So Cloud Builder now gives you an estimate of the cost that you would incur for your deployments before you actually deploy. The fourth, we work closely with the Azure Active Directory Marketplace and Gallery team, and ArcGIS Enterprise is now a listed application right within that, and so you can use that experience for configuring enterprise logins. Another area of work that we did was centered around Azure monitoring and security. And we did work to actually leverage, or rather integrate with a lot of the Azure monitoring services to let you leverage that environment to the fullest. One more feature that we worked on, which sort of is in the realm of developers and automation, is providing our ARM templates on GitHub. So those will go live in the coming weeks. A couple of miscellaneous things to call out. These were, customer requests. we added support for the ArcGIS service account to come from a domain account, to be a domain account if your virtual machines have already joined a domain, you can do that. At 10.7.1, you're familiar with the licensing changes and the new user types. So that one's, we added support for it, including the ability to upgrade from an older version to 10.7. Okay, so what is Azure SQL Managed Instance? For those of you familiar with some of the database offerings in Azure, there's always been Azure SQL Database, formerly known as SQL Azure. That is database as a service, completely managed. There's obviously you can run SQL Server on a virtual machine. That's all the manageability is up to you. So Azure SQL Managed Instance is somewhere in between, where you get all of the manageability benefits of Azure SQL Database, but you do get some of the control of having those virtual machines within your infrastructure, if you will. And so Microsoft is pushing this really heavily as a migration path for on-premises workloads, especially folks who are on SQL Server 2008, which will reach end of life in, I believe, June. So the path forward for folks on that flavor is as SQL Managed Instances. Another big thing why Microsoft is pushing this hard is it actually allows customers to leverage their existing SQL Server licenses agreements from on-premises with Microsoft in the Azure cloud. So there's a translation of core-based licenses that you have that you can use in Azure as well. So with that said, we added support for that at 10.7. At there were some changes that happened at the SDE level, which added support in Cloud Builder tooling for it. And so now when you go to register a database, you can pick Azure SQL Managed Instance and deploy and configure that. The next feature that was new at 10.7 was the notebook server. So the notebook server is essentially another role that you can choose to deploy right within Cloud Builder. As some of you have seen from the plenary and demos and sessions, the notebook server leverages Docker containers under the hood, which, as you're familiar with the way Docker works, it actually requires a hypervisor and a virtualized environment. And because this is running on Windows and Azure, it actually requires nested virtualization, which, if you think about it, virtual machines on Azure are already running on a virtualization tier, and now this is essentially another layer of virtualization. So in order to run the notebook server, you actually are restricted in the set of machines that you can pick for running these machines. And so Cloud Builder is smart enough to know that if you're deploying the notebook server, it'll only show you those images that meet the requirement for nested virtualization. The next one is, as I mentioned, is a feature request we've had from the first release of Cloud Builder, which is users have asked for the ability to get an estimate of their infrastructure costs for running their ArcGIS workloads. So we listened and we delivered on that. On the summary page of Cloud Builder, before you hit the finish button and start deploy, there's a generate cost estimate button, and clicking that will launch a dialog. It'll calculate the cost of your virtual machines, your disks, etc., and any database costs that you might have. For things that are consumption-based, like storage and networking, egress, we sort of point you towards Microsoft Doc for that. But this is a good starting point for somebody who's like trying to estimate, trying different configurations and different machine sizes. They can easily get their sticker shock from this. So.
Thank you.
Yes. The next area of work that we did was monitoring using Azure services. Right. So as you know, Azure has evolved a lot, and their monitoring services have come a long way. And really our intent here is for everybody here to be able to benefit from all of those monitoring services. Right. Azure has a whole suite of services geared around update management and monitoring tools and managing your inventory. So we wanted to make it easy for users to integrate with those services and have your ArcGIS workloads participate in that experience, if you will. So right within Cloud Builder, there's a couple of magic buttons. You click this, enable monitoring using Azure Monitor. You point it to what's known as the Azure Monitor Logs workspace. It was formerly known as OMS, or Operation Management Suite. It has been rebranded last month to be Azure Monitor Logs. And then right below that, you can actually choose to transfer your ArcGIS server logs into that and actually harvest them into it. And I'll show that in a demo. And once these machines are onboarded into Azure Monitor, you can leverage all of Azure's feature capabilities around update management, collecting metrics from the machines, setting up alerts for those. You can schedule your maintenance. Basically, all of the rich capabilities that come with Azure management and security, it now opens those up for you. So I mentioned monitoring VMs, right? So that's monitoring performance, setting up alerts on disk spaces, and that's great for managing the virtual machines, if you will, right? But how about the ArcGIS application itself? A lot of our customers have asked us for the ability to harvest the ArcGIS logs into a log management solution. This helps them in both troubleshooting, monitoring and alerting, and also security compliance. So currently, with current versions of release version of ArcGIS, there are some impediments which make this task a little onerous. Like the log format is custom, and the rotation policy and the path on disk has some changes with that. So what we did was basically the team worked on some changes that adapts these logs that make it easy to be ingested by these harvesters. And the benefits of getting your logs into one of these log management solutions is you can now have full text search on it. You have alerts. They integrate with SIM tools, which help in security reviews and compliance. So I'll do a demo of this shortly, but basically once these logs are harvested, you can use Azure portal experiences for querying these logs. You can set up alerts based on these logs, looking for certain things like error codes, and then you can choose to act on them using all of Azure's alerting services. You can choose to send emails, execute webhooks. Really, the sky is the limit. Like if you really choose, you can choose to email product management every time your SOC crashes. You can choose to do that as well. And it really isn't restricted to Azure's monitoring services. The implementation is generic enough that you can actually harvest those logs into other systems like New Relic or AppDynamic or even like AWS CloudWatch. It's really flexible. Of course, with Cloud Builder, it's all one click, one checkbox. It's all integrated, and you don't have to worry about it. There's no extra work to be done. Touching on this feature for Azure Active Directory, for several years, we've had ArcGIS Online listed as a gallery application, and this made it really simple for people to configure their ArcGIS Online organization with their Azure Active Directory tenant and set up single sign-on. We didn't have ArcGIS Enterprise on there, which had some challenges in that, which actually meant that you had to use an Azure AD Premium license to configure it, because they require that if it's not a marketplace application. Now, we actually worked with the marketplace team and we enlisted ArcGIS Enterprise. So you can actually go through the Azure AD gallery applications, choose ArcGIS Enterprise, provide things like your endpoints for portal and the single sign-on URLs, and you're good to go. The last feature that we will be releasing at 10.7 is the ARM templates on GitHub. We strongly believe in sort of developing in the open and giving our users the ability to contribute back. So we will basically be publishing our ARM templates on GitHub. It'll be considered an entry point for advanced users who don't want to use Cloud Builder to get started for generating the artifacts. I will be going through this demo where I show this on my private repo. In the coming weeks, as I mentioned, they will be available on the ArcGIS repo as well. What we will be including is the ARM templates, the automation that accompanies these ARM templates, and then some sample parameter files and some SSL certificates for test scenarios. You will be required to provide the ArcGIS licenses. And I'll shortly do a demo showing this all working within, say, a browser environment without having to install Cloud Builder or do any of that. With that, I think I've spoken enough, and we'll switch to demos at this point. Cool. All right. So as I mentioned, Cloud Builder is a desktop application for Windows. It's a really easy install, click once application, installs really quickly on Windows. You click it and you sign in, and then the first thing you do is pick a subscription that you're working with. On the landing page, it would show you the list of deployments that you already had, or you can deploy a new site. I probably failed to mention that you can actually deploy not just ArcGIS Enterprise, but ArcGIS Desktop as well. So we have an image in the marketplace with both ArcGIS Desktop and Pro on it. So if I were to choose to deploy a new site, this screen is basically picking, are you choosing to deploy the base deployment, which is the first option, or any of our role-based servers, GeoEvent, GeoAnalytics, Image Server, or the Notebook Server, which is new at 10.7. So if I were to pick the most basic option, right, this is a GIS server, just the generic one that you're used to. It'll ask you for some Azure constructs, like a resource group. Think of a resource group as sort of akin to a folder. One pattern that you'll notice in Cloud Builder is you can either create resources or reference existing ones. So if you happen to have used the Azure portal to create a resource, you can use those within here. Then you would pick an Esri image, the marketplace image to use, and the region to which you will deploy. You can also choose to extend an image and use a custom image. Scenarios for this would be, you took our base image, extended it by adding, say, an antivirus, or added some local data, or something or hardened the image to meet your security and compliance needs. You can actually do that and reference that within Cloud Builder. The next thing you will want to do is provide a unique name for your deployment. And this has to be a a unique suffix, a unique prefix within Azure. The next option is you can choose to do just a simple single machine deployment, or you can do a multi-machine deployment as well. I'll walk through the single machine deployment and then we can go from there. Now it's asking me to browse out for my license file, which I will provide here. And then the ArcGIS Service Windows account. The next screen is asking me if I would like to set up identity and federation for my server. You can choose to have it not federated as a standalone, or you can choose an existing base deployment to federate it with. If you choose to federate it, you provide the portal site administrator credentials, and it'll establish that for you. The next one it's going to ask you is some information about that are specific to sort of your deployment. In this case, since it was a single machine, it's going to ask me for the size of the machine, the type of disk I'd like to attach. We added a new standard SSD option at this release. You basically get to pick an image from all of those that are available in that region. Cloud Builder is smart enough to only show you images that are specific to that region. You can choose the size of your disk in terms of gigabytes, and you can choose to add an additional disk if you'd like. Then some few more parameters around setting the time zone of that server, whether you want to be able to access that more desktop, whether you want to enable Windows Update. The next section is around the virtual network that you want to place these machines in. Again, Cloud Builder lets you create virtual networks or reference existing ones. Since I'm deploying the GIS server, as I mentioned, it allows you to choose, if you choose to have an eGDB Enterprise Geodatabase buddied with your site, you can choose one of these options. And new at 10.7 is Azure SQL Managed Instance. And like everything else in Cloud Builder, you can choose to create one or reference an existing one. And if you choose not to deploy a database with this, that's fine as well. The next one is specific to some Cloud Builder specific needs. If you remember my slide about how Cloud Builder functions, where it takes these artifacts, puts it somewhere, and then triggers an operation, this is basically asking you for that storage account that will be used for that purpose. We went through Azure monitoring. Oops. And then you would choose your workspace, again, the ability to create or reference existing ones, and then you can choose to transfer your server logs to that workspace. The last option is, as I mentioned, the 3 storage options to use on the file share VM, or on Azure Blobs and Tables, or on SMB, which is Azure Files. You pick a storage account for that. The next option is choosing an SSL certificate to install on the web servers. You can either use a self-signed certificate that Cloud Builder generates, or you can use a certificate issued by a certificate authority, in which case you would provide the CNAME or the domain name alias for that certificate, and you can reference that right here. And then you're presented with this summary screen, and this is essentially you can review parameters, you can save that summary out to a text file, and this is the new functionality at 10.7, where it actually looks at what you're deploying and then uses Azure APIs for estimating, based on the region you chose, the type of subscription you're using. It'll actually estimate costs for those virtual machines, and including any data disks or disks that you may attach. Quick note on the automation artifacts. As I mentioned, it allows you to save out these automation artifacts to target either Visual Studio, Azure PowerShell, or cross-platform CLI. Right. So this would be essentially if I were setting up just a GIS server, right? Just the general purpose GIS server. Now what if I chose the base deployment, right? So everything else is similar. The only thing that's different is now we're going to ask you for the portal license as well, and also basically the type of license used for like the administrator, right? So you pick that. Everything else remains the same. You get to deploy all these machines if you want. Now, since I chose the base deployment, I have two options. One is I can say that I want to have a secondary machine where for more resiliency and more capacity, if you will, in which case it'll actually deploy two machines running the same components, if you will. Alternatively, I can choose to basically split all of these into different tiers, right, and have many machines for each. Right? So in which case it's similar. The one thing that you will see different is a new option shows up, in which case you can say, hey, I want to use the names that Cloud Builder provides, or I actually want to specify them. If you choose to specify, it's basically going to show you all of the machines that Cloud Builder is going to be deploying. In this case, by default, it's going to deploy 2 portal machines, 2 servers, a file share machine, the 2 data stores, and the 2 web proxies. And you can change the size of each machine and configure them any way you want. And then when you click the generate summary button, you will get that sticker shock of the 9-10 machines that you chose. So that was the base deployment. If you choose any of the role-based servers, it's very similar to picking the general purpose server. There is a slight delay here because that's not good. That's not a good time. Okay. Sorry, had a network blip there. The notebook server or any of the role-based servers are similar. It'll only ask you for the server license. You'd browse out for the license file for that that has those licenses, and everything remains the same. Okay. So I'm not actually going to do a deployment at this stage. What I'd like to shift over is do a demo of automation, if you will. Okay. So what I'm going to be demoing right now, and since this is the developer summit and I'd like to show you some code, if my Wi-Fi cooperates, is I'd like to show basically deploying, not through Cloud Builder, but an experience that, say, a developer or somebody is like really versed with automation would go through. For those of you who have been in the Azure portal, they have this thing called a Cloud Shell, which basically gives you a command line interface. They provide a Bash and a PowerShell experience. For this demo, I'm choosing Bash, but it might as well have been PowerShell as well. And it's really convenient for doing repetitive things and working in those environments. So I'm just going to quickly make a directory for that. Oops. I keep forgetting that I'm on a Windows machine. Right. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clone my private repo into that. Okay, CD to that directory. I'm going to clone that repo into this directory. And that's done. I'm going to CD into that directory. So maybe I should actually go to that directory so you can see what's there. So this is my personal directory, but you will see this on the Esri channel soon. But there's basically templates for 10.6.1, 10.7, and 10.6 and earlier. Let me just check the Wi-Fi real quick. I apologize.
You don't like losing packets while you're trying to present?
Don't like it so far. So, all right, stay with me, guys. I'm on the presenter's Wi-Fi, which should have been better. Or let me try switching. Okay. Fingers crossed, it stays good for the next 30 minutes. Okay, so basically I've downloaded those templates, and now what I'm actually going to do is upload those license files, right? So I'm going to say upload files. I'm going to browse to those license files. Pick my portal license file. Going to upload my... So they have a handy little UI. The only thing is they always upload it to your home directory, not the current directory, which is kind of odd. And I'm going to upload this certificate to that license file. And I'm just going to quickly copy those files from my home directory. Oops. Right, so I copied it, and so I have that file, the portal license file, my server file, and my certificate. And since I downloaded this from the internet, it's not going to let me execute, so I'm going to give it permission, this script to execute. What's wrong in executing a script from the internet, right? Okay. And then before I actually deploy, I'm going to just execute a couple of Azure commands. The first one is creating an empty resource group. In this case, I call that resource group Esri Dev Summit 19 in the East US. I'm going to create a virtual network in that resource group. I'm just going to pick some defaults for the address, prefix, and the subnet. Okay. And then the next step is actually editing those parameter files. So we have a bunch of sample parameters files. And I don't know if, actually let me go back here. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but the Visual Studio code is actually embedded in this experience as well. So if you're looking for a better experience than say VI or Nano, you can actually use this right within here. So there's really a nice rich text editor right within this. So there's some sample parameters files here, and we've sort of tried to do a good job of trying to ask for the most basic information that you need to do with sort of these to-do statements, right? In this case, I need to pick a prefix that's unique. So for the public IP, I need to pick something that's unique, and hopefully nobody is has used those names yet. And that's pretty much it, right? So I gave those 4 parameters, basically picking picking something unique. And now I'm going to run this deploy script, which is going to basically do what Cloud Builder did, right? If you remember my slide where I talked about the 3 steps, that's all the script does, which is put those artifacts in the resource group that you picked, in that deployment storage account, and then start an ARM template execution, right? So if you look at the command line again, it's running the script, it's giving the path to the template file, path to the parameter file, the resource group to deploy in, and then the deployment storage account, if you will. So with that, it's actually going to go off and do its thing. And if I come back here and look at that resource group, right? So you should see an ARM deployment show up. Oops, something went wrong. Oh, okay. It didn't take it yet, but it should. All right, the demo gods are not with me today because this demo has worked on like 10 different occasions before this. But you get the general idea that basically this is the script you would run. It would trigger an ARM deployment, and then in the span of whatever 45 minutes to an hour, the deployment would be spun up. Okay, I'd like to shift on to the next demo, which is showing you the power of Azure's monitoring services. Right? So in Cloud Builder, prior to this demo, I actually I made a deployment where I actually chose to use Azure Monitoring or Log Analytics, and I choose to harvest all of those server logs into that workspace. So I created this workspace called Dev Summit 19, and you'll see that that the VM that I chose was already onboarded. In this case, that machine name was TK Server 1. And I can now use all of Azure's monitoring tools to actually manage those VMs. An example of which is using Azure Automation. Right? So Azure Automation accounts has all these features around configuration management and update management. Update management provides you the ability to schedule patches on your VMs, like operating system patches. It'll identify if there are any missing Windows updates. You can choose to schedule that and run it whenever you need to. So any VMs that you onboarded to this workspace would show up here, and you can take advantage of that. The part that I want to spend some time on is the logs, right? Everything else is all of the goodness of Azure, but where's the real benefit for ArcGIS? Right? So the way you would actually set that up, and I did this prior to the demo, is once your VMs are onboarded, you would actually go to the data tab on your workspace and go to custom logs, because this is essentially a custom log, right, that Azure knows nothing about. You click on add, and you choose a sample log, and this is something we provide as part of the documentation, and then you would give it a few parameters, which describe how the log harvester will pick up those files. For your information, those log files are actually in CSV. As I mentioned, they're now standardized format, so all log harvesters work with that format really well. And the path where by default where those logs are written are on disk are also documented here. So you choose those, and once you do those, basically the agent on the machine will start harvesting it into this workspace. And then I can come into this logs view and start to query those logs. In this case, the custom log was called ArcGIS custom logs. Let me change that. And if I choose to run, it'll show me all of the records that I have there. So what you're seeing is basically an experience within the Azure portal, which has this language which is called Custo Query Language, or KQL for short. And this is a language that all of Azure monitoring services use. And it's a SQL-like language that lets you do things like projections and filters and various advanced capabilities. And this will actually let you query your logs. I could say, for instance, let me just see a sample of those logs. Right? You'll see here the logs. The things of interest would really be the ArcGIS specific information, which gets captured as raw data. Let me try and grab some room here real quickly. So if I scroll down, you'll actually see the ArcGIS server specific logs. And as I mentioned, they are in CSV format. So if I were to do a split on that, okay, and then I can reference, say the first element, say the second element, and say the 10th element, right? And so this one, the timestamp, the first one was the timestamp, the second one was the ArcGIS server log level, and then the 10th element is actually the log message. So you can kind of look at this query and say that I'm going to write a query which looks for ArcGIS server log messages that match a particular error code. And then you can choose to act on that. Right? And so you write the query, and then you'd basically configure this alert rule and say, anytime ArcGIS server encounters this error and logs this message, choose to do something. Right? In this case, you can choose to create an alert rule, which you can choose to email somebody or take advantage of all of the things that Azure offers, like email, SMS, Azure Functions. Really, the sky's the limit in this sense. Right? It's all leveraging all of Azure services, if you will. So that's logs and Azure monitoring. With that, just want to shift back to the presentation and just give you a couple of tips and tricks for working with Cloud Builder. This is a slide that a lot of people have asked me about, and I've asked for guidance on in terms of choosing what to choose when, in terms of using the file share option versus Azure Blobs versus Azure Files. So this table really captures some of the pros and cons of each approach. Azure Files today has a standard tier, which unfortunately doesn't really do well from a scalability perspective. There is in preview an Azure Premium Files, which we are testing, and that might be an option in the coming months. But as of today, the recommendation would be that the set of deployments that can use it are sort of limited. So really, you really want to be choosing between the file share VM and having your config and content store on, say, Azure Blobs. I did want to call out that the single machine virtual machines VMs have a 3.9 SLA from Microsoft, and then if you do combine that with things like scheduled maintenance, you can actually control the downtime, and so you can actually get higher availability than that. So that's a good option as well. So I wouldn't hold back on that deployment option as well. And then if you're troubleshooting deployment failures, as I mentioned, everything happens through Azure primitives. So every resource that you created is an ARM deployment. It gets recorded in the Azure portal. So you can examine that deployment in the Azure portal and look for clues. You can look at log files. So Cloud Builder generates a local log file of things it does, and then it also captures operations that happen on the remote machines in a remote log file. One of the things we have noticed is with evolving requirements for the Windows credentials is if you don't provide a strong enough credentials, we've seen deployments fail. And we've sort of made Cloud Builder validation better, but that can always be something that trips people up. Again, if you have a failed deployment, I'd encourage you to start with a smaller deployment, start with a single machine and sort of take it from there. And if it doesn't work, please submit a support incident, and where they will ask you for your log files and the deployment summary. That'll really help us sort of improve the product, if you will. And then just wanted to give you a sense of what the team's working on, and this is also an opportunity for us to solicit feedback on what you guys are looking for next. With 10.7.1, given a short time frame, we are looking to support things like Terraform and Packer. For those of you not familiar with those tools, these are by a company called HashiCorp. They're in the sort of the infrastructure as code and configuration management system. So if these are things that you would like to see, please let us know. Anybody here would like to see Terraform support? Few hands. Okay. And then Packer, for those of you not familiar with it, is a tool that's used to create virtual machine images. Works on AWS, EC2, or Azure as well. This is really a requirement we get from customers who really like to customize their image that they use for either compliance needs or extensibility needs. So we want to sort of open source some of the tech we use internally for building these images and make those available to you as well. The third option is solution templates, and this is basically a user experience right within the Azure portal, which lets you make these deployments as well. Obviously, the amount of flexibility that is provided in the Azure portal is limited as compared to, say, Cloud Builder, in terms of they won't have as many controls to pick deployments or sophisticated controls. It is more limited, but it does let you do some of the most basic operations, if you will. And with that, I'd like to open up for questions. Quick housekeeping survey, quick housekeeping task. Please take the survey on the app. It really does help us know how we're doing and go from there. With that, I'll open up for questions. Gentlemen there.
What is the 3 storage options? What do you recommend?
So the question was, in the 3 storage options, what would you recommend? So there really is a trade-off. The trade-off is in the file share virtual machine, you don't get the high availability because it is a single virtual machine. But as I mentioned, if you think about it, you get a 3.9 SLA, which is fairly high for most needs. And then if you couple it with scheduled maintenance, where you control when Azure applies that maintenance, you can sort of manage that as well. Really, the single machine file share has no unknowns, and so will work really well for most customers. The Azure blob or table option is really good if you really want to get a lot of scale, if you have a really large deployment and you envision lots of items and lots of content. It's a good option to pick. But the caveat is that not everything lives on that storage account. There are some things that still live on the VM. So in a sense, you are limited by its availability. But yes, that would be one option. Azure Files, as I mentioned, the standard option has some ups and downs in terms of performance and latency. So we really recommend Azure Premium Files when it comes out to use that. So hope that helps. Gentlemen.
So VMs are slow and expensive to build.
Mm-hmm.
When am I going to be able to do that in containers?
Gotcha. Okay, so the next question is VMs are slow and are so 90s, I guess. So when can I do containers? You've seen the announcements that were made at the plenary and in the road ahead that the new architecture for enterprise will be on microservices and containers and Kubernetes, if you will. So the deployment tooling will be in sync with it and keep up with that experience. So yeah, that's to answer your question. Gentleman at the back. Okay, right. Yeah. Okay, so the question is, why does Cloud Builder always ask for a public IP, or can I deploy my enterprise deployment without a public IP? So that's one of the scenarios that we think you can solve through our ARM templates options. So we might provide a template which shows how you deploy the stack without a public IP, if you will. As you know, if you're not using a public IP, that typically means that you have some sort of private connectivity within that environment. So we think it's something that we can solve through the extensibility approach. So, all right, gentlemen. Yep.
So I saw that this is all designed around deploying the entire stack.
Correct.
What if all you wanted was server?
The question was, this appears to be designed around deploying the whole stack, but you probably missed that nuance, which is in my first demo, where I picked the GIS server. That's essentially just the ArcGIS server, and you can choose to run that in standalone fashion. I guess that's what we would term, the GIS, just the server GIS, which sort of predated WebGIS. You can deploy just the server and buddy it up with the database if you'd like. So yeah, that would be that workflow.
You talked about Postgres and Azure.
Right.
Is that SD compatible?
Yes. So the follow-up question was, is Azure database for Postgres, is that SD compatible? Did I capture that right? Right. You mean the ST geometries and the ST types? I'm drawing a blank at this point, but in terms of which type, whether we use R types or the built-in types, for some reason I'm drawing a blank. I did know that answer, but you can follow up with me. There's obviously performance differences between one and the other.
If you look at enterprise, when it comes to Postgres, there's only very specific.
Right.
You don't support BDB's version. You only support certain.
Right.
So I guess that's why.
Right. PostGIS types, right? Okay. Yeah, I wasn't certain about the answer, but I guess Shailesh corrected me there. But yeah, if you get into that level of detail, yes, there is a difference, especially in performance and types for that. Yes.
In one of your slides, you mentioned Edge Key Vault.
Right.
How are you guys going to leverage Key Vault?
Okay, the question was in the slide presentation, there was a mention of Azure Key Vault. How is that being used? And the answer is it's actually not being used by ArcGIS Enterprise itself. It's only a Cloud Builder integration where you can put your SSL certificates and reference those. If you will. So.
Okay,
Go ahead.
Do you know if they'll ever
talked about. Actually, no, the follow-up question was, is it on the roadmap for ArcGIS Enterprise to work with, say, connection information that's stored in Key Vault, or essentially secrets that are stored in Key Vault? It's actually a good suggestion, but there hasn't been any discussion about that. So for anybody else? Go ahead, sir.
Azure support for Postgres Excel.
So, sorry, could you repeat that?
Is Azure support for Postgres Excel?
Right. Postgres Excel? I'm not familiar with that. So, is that a particular flavor of Postgres or?
Kind of the node-based server structure.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, as far as I know, the Azure database for Postgres, the managed service is using the commodity version or the community version of Postgres, and they manage it for you so in terms of setting up high availability backups and all of that. In terms of like it leveraging a particular Postgres, I'm not sure. Anybody else? Great. Okay, cool. Unfortunately, I'm out of business cards, but my email is nshampur@esri.com, so feel free to contact me or folks on the engineering team. The showcase is closed, so I can't steer you there. Enjoy the rest of your conference and have a good party as well. All right. Thanks, guys.